It's been a while since it was just the two of us talking about space, but that's what we're doing this week.
Yes, this week we talk about our favorite space missions, crewed and uncrewed. Will there be any surprises?
And we love to know your favorite. Let us know via our social media pages at Space and Things Podcast on Threads, Instagram and Facebook, or via the contact form on our website, or by leaving a review on your podcast platform.
And please consider joining us on patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, it's time for episode 204 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but isn't it great to talk?
You're listening to the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 204 of our podcast. How you doing, Emily?
I'm doing great, Dave. I just came back from Disney World. I went to one of the resorts with my family. I'm not crazy enough to go to the theme parks right now because it's about 10 billion degrees outside. Other than that, I'm doing good. How you doing, Dave?
Not too bad. I'm actually quite impressed I have any voice left. I had 7 gigs in the last 3 days. So I've been singing for about 13, 14 hours. And amazingly, I can still talk. So I clearly did something right this weekend. Or I did something very wrong. Who knows? But yeah, it's not hurting too much, which is good. So I feel like we'll be all right today. I feel like we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, this week, we're back to it just being the two of us, and Emily and I wanted to do something which I suppose is kind of obvious, and while we may have discussed these things over the course of the last 203 episodes, we thought it would be nice to put our thoughts in one place. So, Emily, let's start with the crewed missions. What is your favorite?
Oh, Jesus. Okay, when you posed this idea of the episode to me, I had the worst time because there are several missions that are my favorite.
We can do honorable shout-outs, obviously, but
okay,
I am going to make you pick one, though.
Okay, yeah, that's the thing. I was having the worst time because I was like, man, there's a few crewed missions that are like almost on the same level of, oh my God, this is freaking awesome. But probably the number one favorite NASA mission of all time for me is, this is no surprise to anybody, Skylab 4. Definitely. Skylab 4. No surprise to anybody, and there's multiple reasons why it's my favorite. Do you want me to start?
And we could do. What were your honorable mentions?
My honorable mentions, I actually have 3 of them. The last mission in the 1970s that we had, and the first 2 missions of the shuttle. So it would be Apollo-Soyuz, STS-1, and STS-2.
Interesting. I didn't know you were that into the Apollo-Soyuz, but we've got that coming up in the next year, haven't we? So
yes,
I
we
guess
have an anniversary.
I guess I'm going to find out more about your love for that over the next year.
Yes.
But go on, can you do a brief summary for those who perhaps have never listened to any of our previous episodes? Why do you love Skylab 4 so much?
Well, obviously it's Skylab. I'm obsessed with Skylab. So really, I love it because as somebody who writes about space and who loves space history, Skylab 4 was really the true bridge between the Apollo program and the shuttle program because they were really getting experience in how to have workflow in space for the first time and how to manage workflow in space for the first time and how to... I know that Ed Gibson did an experiment during the mission where he basically did a Apollo telescope mount observation for like, I think 8 or 12 hours or something like that. Basically, he did an overnight just doing that. That is something that was later carried over to the shuttle program, that kind of like shift work, so to speak. So they were really learning how to do that for what would come later, albeit it was like 7 years later, much later than they thought it would be. But really, to me, Skylab 4 is the pure linkage between Apollo and shuttle because technically it was still Apollo. You had the Apollo spacecraft, and Skylab was just, I hate saying this, it sounds so bad, but it's Apollo spare parts. Yeah. So really it's Apollo, but they were really thinking more futuristically about the shuttle. And I don't think it's any surprise that 3 of the guys from Skylab, albeit they weren't on Skylab 4, but 3 of the guys from the Skylab program ended up flying on the shuttle. So I think that tells you a lot as well. But also because I think they just had a lot of fun up there. That's something we don't hear a lot about. If you look at some of the film footage, and I I don't know if you would consider it film or video, but if you look at some of the footage from Skylab 4, they were, having a lot of fun messing with the spacesuits. If you watch Searching for Skylab, Pogue was putting fake cardboard fins on himself and trying to swim, trying to show that you can't do that in space as effectively as you would think you would, but it was hysterical. He's wearing like a helmet. I mean, just stuff like that. They were having a lot of fun up there. And I got to give a shout out. Retro Space Images has a great Skylab 4 set. And a lot of the pictures, you can tell they're just having fun and just, I wouldn't say messing around. I hate that term because that sounds like they were just not doing anything. They were very busy, extremely busy. But they were also having just a good time up there, and I don't think we hear as much about, I don't think that crew gets their flowers. I don't think they've ever gotten their flowers as much as they should have, because unfortunately we know kind of what happened afterwards is that the nature of their mission was mischaracterized in certain books and in certain studies. And that's a whole other show unto itself. I won't get into that. We'd be here for 6 hours and Dave's like, oh God, we get canceled, because I'd probably cuss a lot. But I love Skylab 4, obviously. That is my favorite crewed mission of all time. And 84 days in space, one hand on the wheel, Carr, Gibson, Pogue, love them. Just love them.
Amazing. Got a great summary. What I learnt there was that they had a mutiny and basically mucked around for 84 days. So
just screwed around. They didn't do nothing.
Yeah, it does sound like they had a great time.
Yeah, they put there was a Jolly Roger at the Skull and Crossbones. They hoisted it outside. They were like, man, screw NASA. So that's my favorite crewed mission of all time. And like I said, honorable prizes go to ASTP, STS-1 and 2, and every other damn mission out there, probably. I'm a sucker. I love all of them.
Well, I'll start with my honourable mentions. Growing up in the UK, we didn't have that much access to the shuttle missions. We didn't get much information. They weren't on the TV or anything like that. So it's hard to have really been invested in them when I had an opportunity to be invested. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. It was kind of like us with the Soviet missions. We didn't get anything about those except
Absolutely.
We got like little newspaper articles like the Russians launched a space station today. Like, that was it. That's all we got.
And it's as a result, there's no surprise that the two of us aren't talking about Russian missions right now.
Yeah.
There's no surprise there. So I think when I look at modern stuff, I think of how I was able to be engaged with a mission, which I previously wasn't able to be. So honorable mentions for me go to Bob and Doug's flight on the first crewed Falcon 9 flight, the Demo 2 flight that was back in 2020. And part of that is because I was able to watch every single bit of the footage, them getting suited up, walking the drive in the Teslas down to the launch pad in their fancy SpaceX suits, which we'd never seen before. Everything was snazzy, but it was during lockdown. We had nothing to do. So I was literally just watching it because I had nothing to do. And I think that's part of it. I got really into their story. I found out more about them. I thought the package that NASA was putting out was pretty good. I found the Launch America thing a little bit uncomfortable.
We felt that way too because there's international partners. I love my country, but I'm okay with international partners as well. We'll just put it that way.
And the other one that I want to give an honorable mention to is Inspiration 4, the first ever fully private commercial orbital flight. Just because, again, I was so invested in that crew and that flight, partly because of the Netflix series. There's a thing that happens at the moment with all these sports documentaries, which aren't really documentaries. Like there's a Formula one on Netflix called Drive to Survive. And I quite like Formula One, have done for years, watch it with my friends, and we have a little league where we predict results and things like that. But there's a new Formula One fan just because of Drive to Survive, this Netflix documentary, which is a bunch of lies. And I feel like that may be the case with spaceflight as well. Inspiration 4 may have brought new people in to spaceflight. But I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But I'm aware that there was probably some people who are quite cynical about that. But I'm not one of those people. I was so invested in that flight, and watching the launch was so emotional.
Yes.
And Bob and Doug and Inspiration 4, just gave me a whole new appreciation for launching humans into space that I hadn't previously had, because I hadn't had that connection with the people on board, even though I didn't actually know any of these people. So they're my honorable mentions. My other honorable mention is STS-1, just because getting on a space shuttle when it hadn't even launched without a crew on is mental, especially with what we know now. But even without that level of hindsight, it's still crazy that John Young and Bob Crippen flew that thing and went, yeah, cool, we'll get on that. Like, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
That's scary to me. Like, that to me is like, their dedication is on a different level for most people. Because I'll be real, I would love to go to space. Straight up. If I had that flight offered to me, I would have said no.
Yeah.
I would have been like, nope, I'll do STS
10.
5, maybe. How about let's do the 5th one? I'll do Space Lab 1. How about that? Like, I'll do one of the other ones, but not the first one. That is wild.
But for me, what that then leads me on to is what my all-time favorite crewed mission is. I actually really want to give another honorable mention to Apollo 11, because we don't talk about it enough. And I think perhaps because we're saturated with it, and that's what a lot of the general public know about. But without a doubt, you or I are both hugely inspired by Apollo 11. That is a huge mission, a huge part of our life. I'm sure we both have loads of books, memorabilia about it, but we don't talk about it much. I don't know why. It's one of those things, I think, when you live and breathe spaceflight, you just kind of forget about it a little way because it gets so much attention. But this week with the anniversary, I've been loving it. I've been loving all the Apollo 11 posts. On my bedroom wall, I've got a Apollo Remasters print from Andy Saunders, taken by Michael Collins from that mission. I love Apollo 11. I did a huge trip to America just to celebrate Apollo 11. My favorite flight probably should be Apollo 11, but I'm going to give it to Apollo 8, just because, again, the risk element just makes it, the more you read about it, the more you know how crazy it was. Yes, the Saturn V had flown twice before, but not without issues. Yeah. And then to go, right, let's put 3 people on the top. And those 3 people go, yeah, we've probably got a 50% chance of this mission being successful. We'll do it. Because the other 50% means dying, which is crazy. Yeah, they had one engine to come back on. Exactly. And they just didn't know if it would even work properly or not. Like, I honestly think about that and like tears start coming to my eyes. Again, that's one of those missions, like, those guys were a special breed, because I don't know if I'd love to go to space. If they said, okay, this is the one you're getting, I would turn it down. So, cliff notes for those people who don't know anything about Apollo 8. This was the second crewed Apollo mission, but the first one on top of the huge Saturn V rocket, and the first one that went to the moon. They didn't have a lunar module. They just went to the moon, went in orbit. First 3 people to go to the moon. You had Frank Borman as the commander, and then Jim Lovell and Bill Anders as the other 2 crew members. Frank Borman got sick, one of the first cases of space adaptive sickness that we didn't know about at the time. You've got that famous Earthrise image that came out of it. There was a few TV shows that they did, one of which was on Christmas Eve, and they read from the book of Genesis, and lots of wonderful things happened on this mission. One of the things as I've got older, why that's become my favorite mission, is when I then watch documentaries. And as I've watched documentaries and read books, and you see the impact of the reading of Genesis. Now, I'm not religious, but you see the impact of that on the mission controllers, some of whom weren't religious. You see that impact on those people and how they tell the story of Apollo 8. And I think it just adds to it. It was such a risk, and everyone involved, not just the 3 in the spacecraft, were out on a limb on that one, and it meant a lot to them that it went well. Particularly, it was only the second crew mission after the Apollo on fire. They had the deadline of getting to the moon before the end of the decade. There's so many other things going on there that makes the temperature of that mission a little bit more spicy. And I think that's what adds to the power of that mission for those involved. And also, I think there's an element for me, I'll bring on the whole Drive to Survive Formula One fans. I suppose I technically am an Apollo 13 movie equivalent of that, because That's what really drove my interest in spaceflight. And as a result of that, Jim Lovell is my all-time hero, right? So you can tie all of that in. And as a result of Jim Lovell being my hero, of course, I have a bigger vested interest in Apollo 8 and Gemini 7 and Gemini 12. Like, those missions also mean a little bit more just because of that movie.
Well, if you're going to choose a space movie, Apollo 13 is a pretty good.
Absolutely.
It's a good gateway.
Exactly. It was my gateway, or one of my gateways at that point. I was already in, but that just sealed the deal for me and really gave me a hero, which is something that's, I suppose, space has given many of us. So yeah, that's
Yes!
mine. But now let's move on, Emily, to the uncrewed missions. Talk me through your honorable mentions and then pick your favorite.
Okay, honorable mentions would be Voyager, the Voyager program, obviously
Absolutely.
for giving us a planetary tour, except for Pluto, and probably the Pioneer 10 and 11 for this similar reasons. Provided a survey to the outer planets, even though the images weren't very great at the time.
Yeah.
Compared to, the images are superseded by a lot of other stuff. It was something at that time, however kind of rudimentary they were. So that's really cool. This is another hard one because I have about 30.
Yeah.
There's about a million of them that could be my favorite at any given time. But I do have a favorite, and everybody's going to be like, that is a hipster selection because it's not Voyager or it's not one of the big ones. Pioneer Venus 1 and 2. Pioneer
Wow.
Venus Orbiter and Multiprobe. I would say just because Venus is just such a weird-ass planet.
Yeah.
Excuse my language. That is a planet that makes no sense to me. Like, why is it spin retrograde? Like, why is it covered by clouds? Why is it, like, living in Florida all the time on there? Like, what? The atmosphere is like hot soup. Why is it sulfuric acid? Like, why is this planet so freaking inhospitable and weird? Not that any other planets are much better, but, Mars, you might be able to put down some buildings or infrastructure there. Maybe people could live there. Venus, that's not going to happen. Never going to happen. But just think it's fascinating because it was one of the first U.S. missions to send multi-probes to Venus. I think one of them survived for quite some time, about an hour or so,
Wow,
which is actually
more than you would
that's
think.
a long time
Yeah.
on Venus to survive. The orbiter had a radar altimeter. It did not have synthetic aperture radar yet. That was for Magellan. Magellan had that. It was a little more advanced than the Pioneer Venus orbiters. However bad those images were, it gave us a map of Venus for the first time, and plus I love the 70s and space. I'm doing a talk later this summer on space in the 70s. I'm hoping maybe someday to translate this into a much bigger project. I'm obsessed with that era. Most people know this. You know it, Dave. But I just think it's such a cool mission. And it's another mission that I don't think people talk about, because when people recount their favorite planetary missions, they're normally it's the Voyagers. The Voyagers are amazing. Nobody could write a movie about Voyager 1 and 2, and they would, if it had been released before the missions, nobody would have believed it. But I think Pioneer Venus also needs its flowers. It explored a much unexplored planet. It provided us a map of it. It provided us some idea of what it would look like, what it was like. And I really wish, I honestly don't know the status of this, and if it'll even happen, I wish we would go back there to get maybe more information, just because I'm interested in how the hell it ended. It's one of our neighbors, and it ended up being like the opposite of our planet. How did that happen? I mean, that's got to be explained one way or another. And I'm interested in learning more about the history of the solar system, I guess. So that's my favorite interplanetary one. What about you?
Yeah, so I think Voyager has to be the honorable mention, doesn't it? I mean, when I think back to, again, my first interest in spaceflight and going to the library at the school and picking out all the space books that there were, and the first space books that I owned, the kid-friendly ones, the images in there were the ones that were from Voyager. So they are the ones where you start learning about the outer planets, because the solar system became alive to us through Voyager. Further on missions, I think Cassini and Juno were amazing in the photos we got back from them of Saturn and Jupiter are incredible. Also, New Horizons for Pluto, great photos, and I love those photos, bringing that little planet to life in a way that we'd never seen it before. That was so cool how we felt part of it, watching those images coming in and the fly past, and I loved that mission. I think the Mars rovers, I mean, all of them are amazing. And again, there's that whole element of us watching Perseverance land. The video, when we got the video of that, was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Yes.
And I think we've been blessed with how NASA have handled the social media of those rovers, in that it enables us to imagine they have personalities, and it's just great when we start seeing their personalities come through their Twitter feeds, and has enabled us again to be connected to them in ways that we haven't before. So I would give honorable mentions to those missions, but my favorite has to be Hubble.
Yes. Oh God. Yeah. I'm like, how did I not think of that? Yes.
Because I think it's the promise of the space shuttle, that and obviously the ISS, but I think it really showed why the space shuttle was important. The fact that Hubble went up and was able to service it 4 times, or maybe 5 times. I think it was 4 times.
I think 5.
Well, 4 or 5, wasn't it?
Maybe 5. Something like that.
Yeah. The fact it was able to be serviced and upgraded in orbit by the space shuttle, I think adds to it, because for me, though, that makes those shuttle missions a bit more special when you hear astronauts talk about it and how amazing it was to do that. But again, I go back to us in the UK, we didn't get too much mainstream space stuff. But when those first images from Hubble and the first big images came from Hubble, they were on the front page of the newspaper. And they did land, and coffee table books of Hubble images were everywhere. And it's difficult to now imagine life before those images, because they're so ingrained into our psyche, and they've been the desktop screensavers that Apple have used for many years now and things like that. And now we've got other telescopes up there looking at those areas and giving us even more detail. But it was Hubble that really triggered that and got the imagination going for all of us who didn't know how incredible the extended universe can look. Forget the solar system, the stuff that's way out there. And perhaps also at the time when we started getting those images, movies and special effects weren't quite so crazy. You look at things like Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. Yes, there were distant lands and this, that, and the other, and Star Wars, but they weren't anywhere near as outlandish as what we now see in some of perhaps Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. And I think part of that is because of what we saw on Hubble and realized, oh, wow, there's all these colors and there's all these big plumes of dust and smoke and clouds of things where stars are born out of, and it's just amazing. And some of those images are amazing. So again, it's that human connection with the shuttle missions, but also with the results we got and how that actually has transformed life back here in terms of our knowledge. So for me, Hubble will be top.
I agree with you, and I'm just going to throw this in. I love the fact that when Hubble was deployed, there was an Apollo astronaut on board, an Apollo-era astronaut.
Absolutely.
That, to me, is so special because it's like there's a linkage there to like, okay, this person was working on that for a long time, and it's still up there. Like, there's still that heritage up there that this started in part because there was an Apollo astronaut on that mission, and the last people to serve it were people from the late shuttle era. To me, it's kind of, there's that heritage there that I'm like, this is so cool that many people had their hands on this program, you know, and it's people from so many different eras. Yeah, like you said, to me, it was the promise of the shuttle program. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great way to put it.
So, Bruce McCandless is the astronaut, obviously being discussed there. Good old Bruce. So I feel like that's covered our favourite. So listeners, please do let us know what your favourite missions are, crewed and uncrewed. Have we not given them credit? Is there things that we perhaps should focus on as we develop this podcast that you think we haven't given enough focus to? Because there are just so many missions and not enough time. Right, Emily?
Yes. Yeah, we probably left out a bunch of stuff, and I know I left out a bunch of stuff. We would love to hear more.
Absolutely. So please get in contact via our social media or via the contact page on our website and just tell us your stories and tell us your favorites because we'd love to hear them.
Houston, this is Space and Things Base here. It's time to crack on.
So, Emily, what has caught your eye in spaceflight this week?
Yes. Well, I think there was an article. I don't have the link to it, but I know I've read that Starliner, they're trying to work on a date for return. I don't think there's been a date for a return assigned yet, but I think they're still working on that at the moment. So I don't really have any updates on it. But the second thing I have to talk about is there's an article from New Scientist, and it's about Saturn. And its moon of Saturn has an equivalent of freshwater rivers and salty oceans. So there's some science, right? That is crazy. There's some scientists who have used data, I think, from Cassini. And I'm reading this directly from the article. Our most detailed look yet at the strange lakes of Saturn's moon Titan has revealed a diverse seascape similar to Earth's combination of freshwater rivers and salty oceans. However, unlike our oceans, Titan's lakes consist of methane and ethane, which are liquid because the planet's average surface temperatures are about negative 179 degrees Celsius or negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds good. I'm going through menopause. I want to go there. I'm like, that sounds nice. Anyway, this article goes into how some Cassini data was responsible for this finding, some radar data, and it's revealed, quote, according to this article, a increasing amount of ethane as you travel down the planet from its north pole. So the further north you are, the cleaner and purer the seas are, probably very similar to our world as well. So so this is a study. It's a New Scientist. They published an article. I just thought that was really fascinating. I think it's also cool because Cassini was basically yeeted into Saturn in 2017 after a really long, successful mission. Not only did it study Saturn, obviously it studied the moons as well. And I think it's cool that there's data from this mission still being used. You think when a mission ends, they're just gonna stop studying the data, but they're still looking at the data from it. And I think that speaks to how long these missions really are and how people base their entire career on them. That to me is amazing. So really cool finding about Titan this week. Hopefully one day we can send another spacecraft to Titan to maybe explore those oceans, maybe put a little boat on them. Who knows? Dave, what has caught your eye this week?
Okay, I got a few things. First of all, a little update on the SpaceX Falcon 9 story that we talked about last week. There was a anomaly on the second stage, which caused a failure of a launch of a Falcon 9. Well, the launch went well, and the first stage was fine, but it didn't reach its orbit, which is the first time for a long time with a Falcon 9. And SpaceX is, according to this article on space.com, SpaceX is seeking a rapid return to Falcon 9 launches following that rail failure. And it's obviously with the US Federal Aviation Administration who have received a request from SpaceX to continue launching during this investigation. And they've said that because there was no risk to the public, they feel like they should be able to carry on doing some launches. And on a separate note, NASA are doing their own independent review to decide whether future crewed missions need to have any extra safety measures put in place. So lots to learn and lots to come up. So it'll be interesting to see how the FAA handle SpaceX in this one, because I'm sure they're having a lot of pressure put on them because a lot of money at stake with how many Falcon 9 launches and payloads that they are putting up at the moment.
Yep.
Other thing that caught my eye, there's a wonderful article on Collect Space by Robert Perlman about NASA looking at what artifacts they want to preserve from the space station before its 2030 demise. And actually, it's really got me thinking. I suppose it's quite relevant. We talk about our favorite space missions, and we haven't even mentioned the ISS, which has been up there for over a third of all human spaceflight. The ISS has been there.
It's been up there since I was 20.
And it's coming to an end. And I don't think we've got our heads around that yet, that it's
No.
only got a few more years left. And the fact that they're now thinking about what can they bring down. They know they can't bring any of the modules down, but what artifacts do they want that they can then distribute to museums? They're in chats with the Smithsonian and other institutions about what do you want? And there's the captain's logs and the bell and things like that. So I think it's a really good article, definitely worth checking out. For me, being a spacesuit nerd, there's a few stories this week that are also relevant. So the Polaris Dawn crew, which is the next phase of after Inspiration 4, which I talked about earlier, they're doing the first private EVA, the first ever private spacewalk is coming up. And SpaceX have put some images up of the new spacesuit that's similar to the pressure suit that the astronauts have been wearing, but obviously it's a little bit more, I don't know, elaborate. It's got to do more. It's got to have more safety features than just the pressure suit that the astronauts wear, but it still has that same cool image. So we've seen that. At the same time, NASA has delayed ISS spacewalks indefinitely because they have a spacesuit coolant leak issue. Obviously, this has been an ongoing thing for a while, but on June the 24th, there was another leak, and as a result, they're trying to figure out exactly what has happened. At the same time, as an article has gone up about astronauts being able to ditch wearing diapers on spacewalk thanks to a new device that lets them drink their pee.
Oh, damn it. Oh. Look.
Yeah. And
well,
I think
okay.
what I find funny about that is they're obviously worried about coolant leaks and leaks within the spacesuit, and now they're drinking their pee. So,
drinking pee-pee, drinking pee-pee water.
That's caught my eye. And one final thing is that NASA have cancelled the Viper moon rover, which was supposed to be a uncrewed moon rover, and that's been cut due to budget concerns, which is a shame. They're hoping to reuse some of the science equipment that was going to go up as part of the Artemis missions, but this continuing NASA budget issue is affecting programs, and it's not fun. And if you would like to know more about how all that works, do check out our interviews with Casey Dreyer of the Planetary Society, which we did earlier this year. So that's what's caught my eye, Emily. There's a lot going on this week. It's nice to have a little bit more time to talk about it as well. I feel like this section sometimes gets condensed a bit because we've had a really long, good interview, but because it was just the two of us, we've actually been able to have a look at some of these stories. So as always, links to articles about what we've discussed will be in the show notes, which you can find by heading to spaceandthingspodcast.com or by clicking in the link in the description of this podcast on your podcast provider.
Space and Things Podcast, launching from your favorite podcast platform every Thursday.
So that's it for this week. I'm away in Munich next week to watch Taylor Swift.
Awesome.
But we already have a wonderful interview recorded, so you won't be missing anything. Just the What's Caught Our Eye in Space this week section. But we'll be back with that the week after. So thank you once again very much for listening.
If you haven't done so already, please consider signing up for our Patreon page where you can get early details of upcoming interviews, merchandise, and entries into our monthly book prize draw. Thanks to all of you who are already members. It really does make a huge difference to us. But please don't forget that in space, no one can hear you me.
Thanks for listening to the Space and Things Podcast. Back next Thursday with a brand new episode.